Hi everybody, in this video we're going to be dealing with the move 2 Knight f6. 2 Knight f6 is not a very common move and I don't even really know the name of it, so if anyone does know it, please feel free to put it in the comments. It's a variation which allows the move e5, which is what we're going to be looking at in this video. But the main idea of it is that after knight c3, black can go d5. Not only is this a variation that might be okay, also it would not suit us to play knight to c3 because after d6, bishop b5 check, either bishop d7 or knight d7 would leave us with lines in which we can no longer play the move c4. So in some way knight f6 is forcing us to actually battle the black player in the main line over here after e5, which is by no means a problem, but it's good to understand why a certain player might go for this rather than playing d6, for example. Alright, we play e5, knight d5, and here traditionally the main line is knight c3. Black has two major moves here. The first one is e6 that we're going to be looking at, and secondly we'll look at knight takes c3, which was recently seen in a highly topical game, Magnus Carlsen against Nils Grandelius in Norway Chess 2016. So e6 is a move that I faced in the past, and here I like the move knight to e4. Knight to e4 is quite a provocative move. It actually has a pretty straightforward plan. We want to play c4 and d4, and here black could decide to go just knight c6, the normal developing move in this position, but after c4 he's already dealing with some problems of where to put his knight. For example, knight to b6, d4 takes. Here actually knight d6 check is already giving black some serious problems. His knight is very much out of the game, and we can strengthen our pawn on d6 with c5. So one line that could go on here is e5 to protect the d pawn, and now a4, already highlighting the fact that this knight is almost trapped. a5 and then bishop to g5, f6, bishop d2. And as we can see, this king is very vulnerable right now. c5, bishop to c4 might be played next. Also ideas with knight h4 and queen h5. Obviously the position is a little bit unorthodox, but this is simply a very bad position for black. His king is the biggest issue, and even though we're a pawn down, in this position it's not going to help black all that much. All these ideas over the light squares are very dangerous. So really knight to b6 has been seen very rarely, and I think it's due to the fact that d4 and knight d6 just gives white an overwhelming advantage. Now knight to f4 is also a move, and it might be a little bit more tricky. I suggest you go d4, which is a fairly logical move. We're attacking the knight on f4, thereby forcing knight g6. And here d takes c5 can be played. Again, if black takes on e5, he allows knight d6 check, and in this case we'll take with the queen when we're pretty much dominating black's position over the dark squares once again, and we'll just reinforce that by taking our bishop out somewhere and going queenside castles next. Instead, after d takes c5, bishop takes c5 is a little bit more interesting. After knight takes check, bishop d2, queen takes c5, we now see that our pawn on e5 is virtually lost. But it's not that big of a deal, because after bishop to c3, captures on e5 twice, we play b4, thereby forcing the queen back, and now you can already see some sort of initiative developing for white after queen h5. And after the following sequence, d6, f4, it seems to me that white is on top in this position. It might require a few accurate moves, but pretty much white should try to get his bishops back and reroute his queen back to his king, and then stabilize and sort of bring his rooks in. All of these are fairly strange lines, and I don't even think you really have to know them by heart, but just to point out why exactly black is playing the way he's playing. So knight c3, e6, knight e4 is still somewhat alive because of the move f5 over here, which is exactly the move that I faced in 2010 in the Wijk aan Zee chess tournament. And here I really like the move knight to c3 back. So really I gave up a full tempo just to provoke f5, but this seems to me like a fairly big weakness. And what we're going to see over here is actually a version of a position we're going to look at later when black immediately takes on c3, but with the pawn on f5, and I will show you exactly why that is such a big problem. In my game, in this position, my opponent played knight c6, bishop to f4. And normally speaking, white pretty much wants to go either bishop out and queen e2 or queen to d2 and then long castle. But in both cases, white probably wants the queenside castle. However, in this case, also h4 and rook g1, g4 can be a very strong idea to just attack on the king side. Now, what tends to be a very annoying move when you go bishop to f4 is the move queen to b6, because it attacks b2. Rook to b1 would obviously not allow us to queenside castle anymore, and queen to c1, even though it doesn't hurt us directly, we're not quite sure which move to make next, because honestly, moving the queen to d2 or e2 is part of our main plan of castling queenside. So naturally speaking, you would think, okay, I have to go b3 then. And in this case, that's actually alright. But the big drawback of b3 is that after black moves his queen back, note that black's main idea is really to put the bishop to b7 and perhaps reroute the knight to e7 and sort of holds white back as much as he can. But with the weakness of b3 here, after something like this, which happened in the game, instead of playing b6 bishop to b7, black's actually going to try to play a6, b5 and c4. And as you can see, there's some tension around our king side, and this could lead into a pretty dangerous attack, also because the bishop might have a scope on the king there. However, we will see that in the other line, this is a much more serious problem than it really is over here. In the game, I played the move rook to g1, and pretty much after b5, g4, I believe that it is really white who is much faster in this attack. For example, if you were to take over here and play g6, I think, well, first of all, the question is if king to b1 or something like that, but also h4, h5 followed by rook to g7 looks very dangerous over here. So something in this style seems to be quite scary for black. So after rook to g1, my opponent tried to counter this g4 idea by playing h6, which means that after g4 he can go g5 and maybe close the position with f4, thereby winning my bishop. So that's not really a good option here for white. So I played the move h4, stopping this move. And obviously after something like rook g8, I will now have h5 to once again stop g5 and renew the idea of g4. So my opponent made this seemingly ugly move h5. However, since we know that his plan is b5, c4, we do have to act a little bit quickly, because at least we have to find a good way to exploit the weaknesses on the king side in this case. And I think I did that very efficiently by moving my rook back to h1 here with the idea of just bringing the rook to g3, where it exerts very annoying pressure on the g-pawn. So the game continues as following. I got my rook to g3. He played queen a5, I covered my a-pawn with the king, and here immediately actually my opponent tried to steer the game into a very unclear territory after b4, but it turned out to be quite bad for black. The problem is really that if you want to defend it with your rook, for example here, then bishop to e2 will come and this will become a target after, let's say, knight to d4, and it will be very hard to defend both pawns. Needless to say, defending it with your king is also quite a big risk. As you run into all sorts of bishop g5, knight g5 ideas, and the king is definitely not that safe on f7 or f8. So in the game, my opponent played b4, and I simply went knight d4. Also, we see now that the rook is not just useful by attacking the pawn on g7. Likewise, it helps white defend his king's position. And after the following sequence, of course, this is not highly relevant for the opening anymore, but it is nice to see how squeezed black's position can get once you sort of establish the control. So at some point we reach the following position, and yeah, as you can see, once you do manage to really tie black's position down here and provoke weaknesses like f5 and h5, we really see that these weaknesses were sort of telling, because there's always pressure on g6. There's now the queen that's threatening to enter on h7 in some cases. So this was sort of a dominating position. It's my game against Robin Swinkels, and I would refer to this game in case you want to sort of look up the ideas in the f5 variation. But the core of it is really that after all, it is really worth it for white to spend the move on provoking f5, because as we could see later on, this g4 idea just becomes extremely annoying for black to deal with, and it's a very concrete way for white to open up a front on the king side, which directly leads to the black king. So enough about this variation. We're gonna have a look at the actual topical variation that is being played semi-regularly by pretty strong grandmasters nowadays, which is taking on c3 immediately. Now, it should come as no surprise to you at this point that after bishop f4, queen to b6, we're sort of faced with the same dilemma. And in this case, I think queen to c1 might be the best move. I'm not a big fan of b3 anymore, and the reason for that is quite clear. If black goes for a similar looking position like this one, let's say, then something like this followed by c4 is now much more difficult to face, because, well, we could go g4, but it's definitely not opening up the position immediately by any means. So I believe this was a blitz game of mine against former world junior champion Ipatov, and it didn't turn out very well. Something like bishop to d3 and bishop e4 was played. I thought it would be sensible to get the bishop out of the way before it gets blocked in with c4, that I generally don't really want to take anyway. But after c4 followed by knight to e7, my light squares actually also became very weak, and we really see how a strategy of provoking b3 can be quite successful here. So not only is my king a little bit weak, also positionally I'm not doing that well here anymore. So I would not suggest that you mimic my play in this game, but instead I think I came up with a fairly reasonable solution. The other major option is to go queen to c1 over here, which was recently played by Magnus Carlsen, but after f6 we get very interesting positions. In fact, the game went bishop to c4. f6 might look strange to you, but black is just really trying to establish a strong center with all his central pawns left, and white basically not having any after taking. Here g5 with ig4 was played, and e5 is hanging. So this is very concrete play by black. Niels Grandelius played with black, and I have the feeling that this position is actually very suspicious for black. I don't really believe that that this should be good. I believe Magnus played queen to f4 here, and, well, in general the theme here is that black's king is going to be stuck in the center forever. But maybe there black could have found some resources with the help of the computer to hold on. Short castle is also a major option here that I think is very dangerous. But for the sake of keeping things simple, I would not advise you to play this, because it just requires a lot of knowledge for a line that I don't think is that relevant. So instead I like the slightly clever bishop to c4 first. Now, why do I like this move so much? Because it's based on a sort of a sacrificial idea. So I think e6 over here is the most logical move on black's part. Now I go bishop to f4, and now I think queen b6 is once again the normal move to go for. If black does decide to not go for any of the queen b6 stuff, then I think we really have a good position. This was the game of Yevgeny Nair against Korobov, and we sort of see the plan here is quite straightforward. We want to double the rooks, which is what white did. Played rook d2, rook d1, then he decided to change the bishops, and really it's not like it's very easy for white to create any sort of progress here. Black is very solid, but black has absolutely no real idea of how he's going to improve his position over here. So h4, this is a typical move to gain some space on the king side, and yeah, the following game I would refer to as once again just one of the games that if you struggle to sort of understand how to improve your position slowly but surely, then this is definitely something to follow. Right now, queen e4, queen g4 putting some pressure on this, or maybe queen f4 putting pressure on the f-pawn would be interesting. And later on, white could also start thinking about trying to reroute his knight. For example, if you really have the time here as white, you could think about rook d3 and then putting the knight on e4 or c4, aiming for the d6 square. Either way, this is a very pleasant position for white. As we can see, black has no counterplay whatsoever on the king side in this position, so this is a successful opening for white. Going back to bishop to f4, I think that the move queen b6 should be once again critical over here. But in this case, I believe that it's really very dangerous for black to go for this, as the move knight to d2 is now possible. And the point is really that I've sped up my my development somewhat by putting the bishop on c4 already, and I want to go knight e4, castle, and just sort of start attacking black. So I think taking the sacrifice is probably the most testing way of dealing with this. Queen to c7 can simply once again be answered with queen to e2. Of course we have to slightly adjust our play here, but we're still going to go castle over e1 and try to go knight e4 or knight c4 one way or another. So it just seems like a waste of a tempo for black then. Instead, queen takes b2, knight to e4, and here I suppose the most logical move is to go bishop to e7 to start development. And castle. So this could be more or less the critical position, and I really feel that white is risking very little by sacrificing this pawn on b2. I mean, black is just so much down in development. I don't think this is really a playable line. So for example, if black now decides to retreat his queen, we go queen to g4, and so black sort of managed to at least get his king out and have an active bishop on e7 rather than not having developed anything at all. But after bishop to g5, we're using a little tactic over here that if takes, there's queen takes g7 or queen g5 check. Probably queen g5 check is directly winning the piece, because f6 runs into queen takes g7 and queen takes f6. So this is not working, and queen to d8 would be the solid move, but simply f4 followed by something like rook d1, knight d6, and a well-timed f5. I think the position is almost lost already for black. So yeah, this is just quite a horrible way of dealing with it. Then there's this move h6, which is a little bit more clever, because at least it's stopping bishop to g5 ideas, which will directly harm black's dark squares. Note that if black doesn't go for bishop to f8, then at least whenever white goes for queen g4, there's knight d6 check, and if black takes, there's always a queen takes g7 idea attacking the rook. So bishop e7 really makes sense here for black. So after h6, I think rook to b1 is the natural move, queen a3, and now I like bishop to b5, which makes sense to me because the bishop is relatively white's worst piece here, so we don't mind changing it off. And also knight to d6 check next is something that we're aiming for. So for example, queen to a5, bishop takes e6 will definitely give us some initiative here as well, but I like knight d6 simply because black is really struggling to defend his pawn on c5 at this point already. So after knight e7, rook to d1, attacking the d7 pawn, queen d8, let's say queen takes c5. I think it's very obvious that white has a large advantage over here. Even though a few pieces were exchanged, I still don't think the black king will ever be fully safe on the king side with the two bishops and potentially a rook swinging in from rook d3 to rook g3 and so forth. So this is really my take on the line. This move knight to d2 is a novelty, so I don't know if it's already something that players are familiar with or other people are planning to play it, but to me this looks like a very dangerous way to tackle this queen b6 problem that we're facing. And if black decides not to go for queen b6, I simply believe the position is a little bit too passive, and we can make very normal moves and thereby gain the advantage. So that's it for knight f6. It's not a line I expect you to see very often, but it's good to know a little bit about it when you do face it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and last but not least, we're going to be looking at the 2 a6 Sicilian, which is also another tricky one that you just want to know a little bit about. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the last video.